to arrange my background over my head here. So
there you go. You have your third morning.
How about that right there?
Are we ready?
We are ready.
Okay, here we go. Good morning. Welcome to the Friday feature. For people who don't know me, I'm Dale Quigley. I'm the district governor nominee designee. Say that 5 times fast. We are so happy to have everyone here today. It's really very nice as a district to get together every Friday. Today we have a great feature for you, and presenting our speaker this morning is Al Drizel.
Hi, good morning, everybody. I'm really pleased to introduce Rebecca McLean, who's been working in the field of domestic violence for over 30 years. She started as a volunteer at Casa de Esperanza and the St. Paul and Ramsey County Domestic Abuse Intervention Project. She's moved through the stages of being a legal advocate, a hospital and clinic advocate, program manager, and she's currently the operations director for the St. Paul and Ramsey County Domestic Abuse Intervention Project, which is the project that provides the official court project that provides support to victims of domestic violence that have been come forward in St. Paul and Ramsey County. And before I retired, I used to work in that area with the Ramsey County Attorney's Office. I've worked with her for many years, known her for many years. She's a tremendous person and really does a lot of good work in this area. She has trained healthcare professionals, religious and spiritual leaders, law enforcement individuals, attorneys, and court personnel on domestic violence issues. And she's going to talk to us about how COVID-19 has affected domestic violence and hopefully some things that Rotarians can do. And I'm just pleased to be able to introduce her. So Rebecca, your go.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yep.
Yes? Okay, great. Just let me know if you can't. Let's see, so I put together a brief PowerPoint, and I don't know if
I can bring that up now if you want.
Okay, perfect.
If I can get this going, share screen. There we are. So can everybody see it?
All right, very
okay.
Excellent.
Just let me run through the slides.
Let's see. So I understand you recently, or if you had various trainings on presentations on domestic violence. So going to specifically focus on sort of what's going on with the pandemic. And it's been really tough, and we're sort of learning as we go because things keep changing in terms of the governor's orders and how people respond, and lots of uncertainty. But some of the things that we see the most, and let me just tell you very briefly, at St. Paul Intervention, we're not a shelter program, we're a legal advocacy program, and we do advocacy in the criminal justice system in the city of St. Paul and Ramsey County, and we assist with getting orders for protection. We get notified from the St. Paul police after they go out on domestic calls, and we do outreach to victims. We have a variety of support groups. We help with financial issues. We have a 24-hour crisis line. We have a diverse staff speaking about 4 or 5 different languages. We work with the Victim Safety Center in downtown St. Paul, where we always have a staff person there. They're currently closed, unfortunately, but so that's just sort of in a nutshell what our agency does. So wanted to start with just talking about some of the sort of how it's affected, the pandemic has affected victims. So with the slides, can I control them or do you control them? I'm not sure, but if you could.
I control them,
perfect.
so.
Great. So in terms of, I think one of the biggest things is the increased isolation for victims. Suddenly, for example, we have, and most other programs have had to suspend support groups. And support groups are a huge, huge benefit for victims of domestic violence who by nature are isolated and cut off from support systems. And our agency has older groups for older battered women. We have groups in the Ramsey County Workhouse. We have Spanish-speaking groups. We have a general group, and they're all currently suspended, which is really challenging. So our facilitators do make individual phone calls to them to give support during the support group time, but it's in particular the older victims have expressed a lot of loneliness, and just been really tough on them to not have that in-person group. Just not being able to go places, especially for victims who are living with their abuser, to not be able to go out to see people, to connect with people, to get help. Many also are sheltering in place with their abuser. So while they may be, safe from the virus, they're not safe from the abuse. Let's see, there's also, in terms of, it gets complicated with the criminal justice system because while nobody, wants the abuse to happen and they may want their perpetrator arrested, they may fear that they're going to get the virus if they go to jail. And then the other part of that is most people are not being held in jail like they used to. They're not setting bail for the most part for most domestic crimes. Most of them are being released, so that creates increased danger for victims. There's usually a domestic abuse no contact order issued by the judge, but it's, not having them in jail is another safety concern. Let's see, some may be avoiding calling the police as well because of the fear of what's going to happen with the whole COVID-19 situation. A big thing we're trying to work on at our agency is orders for protection because the court office is closed, or they'll help people by phone, but you can't go down to file an order anymore. So the whole process is more complicated and cumbersome, takes longer, especially for victims who do not have computers or who are not tech savvy. It's a longer process. And court hearings are happening by phone, and they're starting to move to Zoom, at least in Ramsey County. But not having a court hearing where you can see the judge and the judge can see your face and your expressions and everything really changes everything. And if you want to go to the next slide, the other piece is, when you're doing a phone hearing, you don't really know, if you're sheltering in place with somebody else, or you don't have privacy, you don't know who else is going to be hearing the information. You don't have your support systems there normally. It just creates multiple hurdles. But we are doing, our attorneys, we have 3 attorneys on staff, part-time civil attorneys, and they are attending hearings by phone. And we're working through the glitches with the bench and with our staff and advocates with orders for protection, how to make that an easier process through all this. Additionally, you cannot file by email. It has to be in person or by fax or online, but quite a number of our clients do not have computers or do not have internet. Something that we often take for granted. The other piece is things like, people who don't have computers would often go to a public library to use the public computers. It's very common, and they're all closed. So that's another barrier for not being able to connect with the outside world, not being able to access information, not being able to file the order. Let's see. The other issue is with court hearings, doing things remotely, is if the victim doesn't speak English. it just adds another barrier if you have an interpreter that's not in person. So you're doing the interpreter on the phone with the victim, and then it's a lot harder, and it's pretty scary if you're, you know, a new immigrant and going through a court process by phone with so much unknown. So that's another challenge. And even just, you know, entering evidence, or, you know, if you're not tech savvy, and there can just be so many hurdles, and, you know, some people are just going to give up because it's too hard. And the terms of criminal court cases, and I know some people are from Wisconsin, but I'm mainly talking about my experience here in Minnesota, but I expect it's not very different in Wisconsin, just overall. And I work in Ramsey County, St. Paul, but the courts are state run, so that it's, you know, statewide, the changes. But most criminal court cases are being continued. They're in Ramsey County, they are only handling in custody cases. So things like jury trials, pre-trials, sentencings, things like that are all being continued. So essentially any perpetrator who's committed domestic violence and is maybe waiting sentencing, that's being pushed out, which means they're not being court ordered to any programming. They're not getting ordered to treatment. They're not being ordered to pay restitution. And all perpetrator groups are also suspended. So they're not getting the help as well. So, and they're not being held accountable. So it's kind of this really broad effect. And one thing looking out, we're going to be talking, I think, to the prosecutors and the bench soon regarding, you know, what's going to happen, you know, in a few months, because all these court appearances are being pushed out. What's going to happen when they all get rescheduled? There's going to be a huge backlog in the system. And that's kind of an unknown yet, what all is going to happen with that. Let's see, if you want to go to the next slide.
I'll see if I can do that. I
okay.
have to leave share and come back.
Okay.
I'll be back.
And again, with immigration court is another issue that a lot of things are being postponed. Offices closed. If somebody has an open case and they're needing to meet with somebody or get a hearing, there's just a lot of confusion and a lot of fear among immigrants. Some of the other issues, obviously, with schools being closed. So it means the kids are home. So if there's domestic violence going on, they're going to be around it more often. And of course, with people, the layoffs and people not working, that creates all sorts of issues. Being in the home, being, you know, where there may be increased violence because, you know, the perpetrator is home all the time. And the kids are being exposed to that and may be victims of additional violence as well. And then, of course, the financial impact, as I think everybody knows, is huge. And if, you know, you're a victim of domestic violence and you're trying to leave or trying to make ends meet, and then suddenly all your income is gone, it just exacerbates everything. And it can also be, you know, another sort of tool for the perpetrator to, you know, keep you there. And I know there are some resources which we'll talk about in a minute during this time. Some of the other issues are shelters. Sorry, I'm going to get back to the shelters in a minute to talk about what's happening during the quarantine or the social distancing. First, just wanted to mention I can't express enough the isolation with for victims who don't have computers, some of them don't have vehicles, you know, being so isolated and trying to seek help, and just other agencies that are closed as well, social service agencies. And I know like food shelves are open and certain things, but places that people might have gone before just to get some other types of help are closed. It just creates additional issues. The other issue is, I think, increased fear and anxiety. I mean, I think that's with everybody has that, you know, and the uncertainty. But when you're a victim of domestic violence and you're already living with fear and anxiety, it just ratchets it up. We're really, you know, trying to reach out to people and be here to be supportive and do all that we can to support victims during this time. Some of the, in terms of services, so our program and domestic violence programs in general, shelters, advocacy programs are considered tier 2 essential services, meaning that we continue to provide services 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It looks a little different in terms of many services are now being provided remotely, but they're still available. And in your area, wherever you are, they should be, at least in Minnesota, services are available. Some of the differences are, like I mentioned, the courts being closed for the most part, in terms of what's going to be done remotely versus in person. Shelters, however, where obviously people are there in person, continue to operate. Lots of changes have been made for safety reasons, such as contracting with hotels to have some of the residents at hotels, either for quarantine purposes or just to have less people at the shelter to allow social distancing. And a lot of shelters have advocates, some of their staff working remotely, some in person, again, to limit the amount of contact. But shelters generally are full all the time, as they had been before the pandemic. Homeless shelters are generally full as well. So it's definitely challenging. You know, lots of restaurants are closed, so hotel restaurants are closed. So then there's, you know, that challenge of getting people food when they're in hotels. I know the shelters will bring food from the shelter to the residents that are staying at the hotels. Let's see, sorry. This is my first online presentation, so I'm a little, if I'm not sounding that coherent, I apologize. But just to reiterate that crisis lines are answered all the time. And something that we do here is we try to see what we can do remotely as much as possible. Sometimes people have to come to the office to pick something up or drop something off or sign documents, but whenever possible, we try to do it by fax or email or, you know, other means, just to protect everybody. And obviously take personal protective measures, masks and other things. And we have limited staff working at the office at a time. Most people are remote. And I think all the programs are doing that as well. And we're kind of learning as we go. But some of the, you know, and obviously safety planning's looking a little differently now, depending on the situation and what the resources are. And even like the police stations are closed for the public too, which is a change. So people can obviously call 911 and call the police, but you can't go into the police stations like you used to be able to file a report. So there's just, you know, a lot more hurdles and a lot of financial issues that have come up. We've always helped people with financial things, but now there's an increased need, and we're working with different agencies, and the county has recently allowed people to apply for emergency assistance they've changed some of the rules there, and there's some additional funding. So we're constantly looking at the resources and responding and doing everything we can to help victims and get them connected to unemployment or other types of resources. St. Paul had a temporary resource that was available, and I know different communities have things, so we're getting the word out. And the other thing is domestic violence programs in Minnesota have at least weekly conversations and Zoom webinars to be kept up to date on all the changes and what's available and strategize and problem solve. So it's a constantly changing thing because we don't know how long the stay-at-home order will be. We don't know, there's different impacts that we'll find out as we go along. So we're learning and trying to figure out from week to week what all we're going to do. I included, it did not come out very well. There's a couple posters that the Violence Free Minnesota put together, but they didn't come out very well on there. But we have a bunch of them available, and I emailed to Al, but we have some, if anybody wants them from our office, I can mail some if in small amounts, or if anybody's in St. Paul, we can arrange a distance pickup. One is to put up for victims getting help, and the other is for agencies or businesses that they can have information available. For example, a restaurant, if they think a customer has been a victim of domestic violence, or a liquor store, or whatever, for other places, just to sort of make the general public and places that are open more aware and being able to offer help. Because a lot of people don't know there's still help available. And then I also included
Can I interrupt just to verify? Is the screen showing?
It cuts it off though. That's the problem.
Yeah, I'll go down. I just want to make sure it's there. So.
Oh yes, it's there. Yep.
Thank you. Sorry.
Yep, that's okay. And then I included the next. You can go to the next slide. And the next one, my contact information and our website. I know we're in St. Paul and you guys are all over, but I'm happy to be a resource for anybody. We also are a resource for the Blueprint for Safety. I don't know if anybody's familiar with that, but it's a best practices guide for the criminal justice system with domestic violence. And we do a lot of training and work with programs along with Praxis International in how to improve the system's response to domestic violence. And there's more information about that on our website, which is actually being updated. So soon we'll have a better website. I also included a slide for Violence Free Minnesota, which is the statewide domestic violence agency where different programs from all around the state are members. If you want to keep going through the slides there. And it used to be called the Minnesota Coalition for Battered Women, which is the more common name you might know them as, but they're a great resource in terms of finding a program in your area if you need it. And they have just, calendars of events, things like that. And then day one services to contact, it will connect you to the nearest domestic violence agency in Minnesota, where if you just call the number, it will connect you to the agency that's closest to you. And then I also included the Wisconsin Coalition for Domestic Violence, because I know some people from Wisconsin, and I'm sure Wisconsin, it's probably fairly similar, I'm guessing, in terms of what's going on, but there may be some differences in terms of the stay-at-home orders or courts and things like that. So I just wanted to see, are there any questions at this point or comments or?
We have a hand raised, Tim Heckman.
Yeah, can everybody hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
I'm a court commissioner in Wisconsin in St. Croix County Circuit Court. So I work in the court system as a judicial officer, and we're seeing exactly the same thing in responses from the court system that you have in Minnesota. Same problems. An influx of cases has started showing up in my courtroom, but nothing different from what you said here this morning.
Okay, thank you.
So I can't see the chat while I'm doing the screen. So Dale, do you see anything in the chat that might be a good question for Rebecca?
So the one question we've gotten so far is whether or not they can get a copy of your PowerPoint slides.
Sure. Yes. I sent it to Al. I don't know if Al, can you forward it to people, or what's the best way, or I can send it to somebody else?
I think, Kathy, can I forward it to you and you send it out?
Yes, you can.
Okay. So the question I have is,
I'd be able to put it in the chat if it's a link.
well, it's a link to an email to me. So
If we can paste that into the chat, everybody can just copy that.
I could try it.
yeah, if Rebecca can do that. It's an attachment to an email on my computer.
I will try. I'm not that tech savvy.
Hi, can I ask a question while you're talking?
Yes.
Yeah, my name's Teri Romans. I'm actually a psychiatrist at Mayo Clinic, and I'm in Rochester. So I'm at part of the Risers group in Rochester. And so I very much appreciate your talk. We are seeing this probably even more than COVID in our emergency rooms right now, especially with regards to the suicide attempts now and alcohol and drug increases, of course, the depression and anxiety. The mental health issues are just skyrocketing as a result of this, but they've been a problem for a long time that have been under-recognized and ignored, unfortunately, for the most part. So I hope that Rotary can really start getting more involved with some of the mental health issues going on in this country, because they are really, the resources are not enough to deal with the issues that are going on, and it is a huge problem. So I just wanted to thank you, Rebecca, for your presentation. And I agree with everyone else. I'd like your slides and your materials so we can pass out.
Yes, thank you for sharing that.
Okay, and Rebecca, I have a question, which if you can put it in the chat, that's great. But if not, I'll make sure Kathy gets it and sends it out to everybody. But the question I have is, can you think of anything that Rotarians can do now?
Good question. I think, sorry, I'm trying to do this. Oh, it didn't work. Sorry, I was trying to do, sorry, sharing the thing, but look, I guess one thing would be reaching out to your local program to see how, if there's things that you can help with in terms of donations. Certainly, we have had in our program an increase in requests for, gift cards, like for Target, for gas, for, buying food, gas, things like that. Just basic needs things. We also, we got donations of masks to give to clients. And I'm sure other programs need that too. A lot of people don't have masks. And, we get the cloth ones. We got some donated from the Department of Health and some other people. So, in each community, getting masks donated for people, kind of basic needs for people who are unemployed, food, things like that. And then I'm thinking each program probably has different types of needs. I think in terms of other, like volunteering or whatever, is probably they won't be taking, most places aren't taking new volunteers right now, but I think financial and basic needs types donations are definitely needed.
So Rebecca, we do have a couple of other questions too. So here is
Sure.
one from Brad. What advice would you recommend to give to someone living with an abuser during quarantine and who is not willing to reach out for help?
Boy, it's really challenging. So, I mean, I guess if one could talk to the person, you know, so they have a phone number, so they have, you know, be able to figure out a safety plan. You know, ideally to even be able to have one number to call, have a way to be able to get out, at least briefly, they could, you know, to talk to somebody, because it is so isolating. And, you know, obviously it's got to be driven by the person. You know, they need to make the decision.
Uh-oh. Rebecca, you ended up muted somehow.
Okay, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So, you know, it's going to really vary, I think, on the situation, but hopefully to make some connection with the person, maybe could, you know, people like we've done before, and trying to find a place to meet at the grocery store, or, you know, even just to make that connection to find out resources so that they can have somebody to talk with confidentially that's safe and plan. You know, they might want to, you know, may take longer to make that decision to leave, or maybe they aren't going to leave, but it gets more complicated now with the kids and not having the financial resources. But I think to make sure they have a phone number and have be able to talk to an advocate to make a safety plan. I think that would be the way to start. Know that they're not alone. Yeah, that would be the main thing, I think.
Rebecca, if I can add one thing also, when you have a victim that is reluctant to leave, it's kind of natural to get frustrated with them. And,
True.
you know, be judgmental about why won't they leave, what's wrong with them, and assume that there's some defect in them that causes them to stay. And it's really important to not project that to the victim.
That is,
even
yeah.
if you feel that way, you've got to be somebody that they feel safe.
Right.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And that's something, as advocates, that's kind of our number one thing, is to be supportive and non-judgmental, and understanding that we're not in their shoes and it's their life and their decision, and we may only have a small bit of information as well about what's going on with them. People often don't share everything, and they know best what they need. And if judgment comes across, or criticism, or feel like, you know, they're being controlled by just another person, then that person's gonna not trust you and not reach out for help when they do need it. So having an open door, being supportive is huge. And you're not there to, you know, fix things. You're there to be a support, a resource, and, you know, not to be another controlling factor in the person's life. And to not take it personally too. I think sometimes people will take it personally if the person doesn't take your advice. And to remember, it's not about you. You know, they know what's best for their life, and they'll make their decisions, and it has nothing to do with you. I know sometimes prosecutors have gotten put out because the victim, you know, changed her story or recanted, as they call it, or and it has nothing to do with the prosecutor. It's what they're doing to survive. And it's it just, they might sometimes have to lie to survive. And that's a reality. So I think, you know, knowing to be a supportive person means a lot. You may never know what an impact that is. I know a story from a long time ago, but it still stays with me, of a woman I knew who, she went to the doctor and had injuries consistent with an assault, and the doctor asked her about it, and she said, "Oh no, I fell down," or whatever. But the doctor was so supportive and nice, and said, "Well, I'm always here for you anytime. You can always talk." And so because of that, then the next time she went to a doctor, it was a different doctor, but she then shared about the abuse with the second doctor because of what the first doctor said. So we don't always know the impact of, you know, what we say and how that can affect the person long-term. Getting those, you know, supportive, positive messages go a long way.
And it's interesting too. I have another question for you in just a second, but
Sure.
I think it's easy to forget as well that there are men out there who are victims of domestic violence. And we talk about the women all the time, but I personally have 2 male friends who are both victims of domestic violence. So we need to forget that, or we need to remember, I should say, that both sexes are involved in this. It's not just women who are being abused out there. It's a complete societal problem. The other question that we had though is, are these flyers available in different languages?
I need to check on that.
Okay.
So I'm not sure.
Okay.
I can find out and let Al know.
That would be great.
They just got, were printed very recently, so I will find out.
Okay, that would be great. There was another one here. They're hearing.
Can I ask you, sorry, what particular languages were you thinking of?
Well, somebody was saying Spanish. The one in the question. I'm reading the questions off of the chat box.
Okay.
So they were
sorry,
talking.
I can't see them. So yeah.
So they were talking about Spanish, but I'm sure with our community, you know, Hmong, Somali. But the person just had put in particular.
Okay.
So, and then there was, as Amy says, we're hearing of a substantial rise, 50% in alcohol usage during this time. Are you hearing from clients that this is another of their concerns, whether they're the ones being abused or by their abuser?
You know, probably I'm not on the crisis line right now. So, but I expect, I haven't heard that lately, but I'm sure that that's true. I mean, it just totally makes sense because of what's going on. So I'm sure that is true. Yeah.
Okay. And then Tom has a question. You want to go ahead, Tom?
Yes, ma'am. Rebecca, I was a prosecutor in the district attorney's office, did felonies in Georgia, and this was 20 years ago. And we had a lot of issues, like you were saying, with recanting. So back then in our spare time, we would try to raise money to buy those little box disposable cameras so we can give them to officers because they didn't have body cams. I was just wondering, nowadays, since all the officers have cell phones, is there better evidence of these cases when they happen?
Yes, and they have body cams too, at least in St. Paul. I don't know if that's statewide yet. But yes, I think that it's gotten a lot better for sure. And I think the way they look at how they ask the questions, getting, you know, additional evidence. So yes, I think it's gotten a lot better than it used to be for sure. And there's, more cameras available, certainly. And, you know, they ask, you know, in St. Paul, at least in Ramsey County, for the most part, you know, they'll still proceed with prosecution if they have enough evidence, whether or not the victim has recanted or not.
Yeah, maybe I can say a few words about that too.
Yeah, that'd be great, Al.
It's called the new concept. Well, it's new. It's about 20 years old now, but newer concept is evidence-based prosecution.
Right.
And the idea that police officers need to be specially trained to gather as much evidence they can at the scene and at the time of the report, and that includes exceptions to the hearsay rule, like excited utterances, statements to a medical provider, which is an exception to hearsay. So even if the victim doesn't testify, those statements come in, plus gathering medical evidence, photographs, witnesses. And the idea is that as long as there's sufficient evidence to go to trial and get a win, that even if the victim doesn't testify, or even if he or she comes in and recants online, you can still get a conviction. And I know that when my time as a prosecutor, many times I would have the victim come in and totally recant and still have the defendant found guilty because the police had done their job in getting evidence.
Yeah, if the police do a good job at the outset, it makes all the difference, because there'll be more guilty pleas too, because it will be a stronger case, and less cases will actually have to go to trial even.
All right. Hey, so Rebecca, I think we are winding down. There are no more questions on the chat line. Do you have any final words or thoughts for us?
Let's see. I think I know you're a very supportive group, but to be kind of aware of just wherever all your circles of people, of being sort of aware and being supportive and having numbers to give to people if needed, or even somebody you might run into in the store that, to connect with your local program if possible and see what they need. That could make a huge difference. I think people are just under a lot of stress, obviously victims under a tremendous amount of stress. I think also service providers, because, shelter workers are, in close contact with people every day. And it's, there's all the fears too of getting sick as well. So I think to be, supportive and aware, and, those are the two things I guess I would say right now. And I'm sorry, I had challenges with trying to put it in the chat box. So I'm not sure if somebody can email to the participants the PowerPoint, or
We can take care of that on this end, right, Kathy?
Okay.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, great.
So anyway, Rebecca, thank you so much for coming on today and doing this.
Oh, you're welcome.
It's much needed. In this time, sometimes we only think about what's happening with COVID and we forget about all of the consequences that are coming down the line that we're going to see for quite a period of time. So thank you so much for coming on. I have to apologize right now for not welcoming Susie Howe to our webinar this morning. She is a director from Rotary International, and she is she's been on the call with us. Even more importantly, she is our speaker next week. So she obviously is quite the leader, being a Rotary International director, and she is going to come next week and share a story of leadership in crisis, the critical elements that apply whether in crisis or in calm. One of the wonderful things about Rotary is that it does lead. Not only does it lead, but it teaches us all to be better leaders. And Susie will have her talk next week for us. I hope everybody can attend, because that should be another fabulous Friday morning. I think that is what I have. Paul, do you have anything on your end left to say?
Sure. Thanks everyone for being here, and a lot of repeat attendees, so I'd love to see that. Share what the district is doing with these Friday features. Invite others to join in from the comfort of their own home or work like me. And next week we have district training assemblies, so check out the website, district website, for that. And have a great weekend. And